There's a lot to be said for keeping your fly selection simple. You don't need hundreds of patterns and dozens of sizes to put fish in the net. Sometimes, though, switching things up can be just the thing to start catching more or bigger fish. When fish see the same patterns day after day, they start to wise up to things. And in winter, with fewer aquatic insects moving around, that's especially true because we tend to use the same couple of patterns all season long. So, this week on Untangled, you'll learn about some underrated flies you can start throwing this winter. By the end of the show, you'll know how, when, and why to use these patterns. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant. Got a bit of news for y'all before we get into the show today. Starting in January, there is going to be a second weekly episode of Untangled hitting the airwaves. I know, you're welcome. It's very generous of me to do that for y'all, isn't it? No, it's going to be a lot of fun. The second show is going to be audio only, so you can grab it Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio. We're still sending it out via the Pony Express and Smoke Signals if you're subscribed to us there as well. But this second episode is going to be slightly different than the main show, and this main episode is not going anywhere. Nothing is happening to it. It's staying the same. But the second episode is going to bounce between all Q&A or guest interviews or storytelling. It's just an opportunity to do some of the different things that we all like here and not cram it into one show every week and make that show like 8 hours long. So that's coming in January. I'm really excited about it, and I hope y'all are as well. Just wanted to share that with you and get you stoked for 2026 if you weren't stoked already. But anyways, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about winter fly patterns. So let's get into it. I have preached this concept on the show a whole bunch. And if you're a longtime listener, it's going to be really familiar to you. But I don't know how often I've told y'all, you don't need a million fly patterns. Don't worry about buying every pattern for sale at the fly shop. A lot of them are tied to catch the anglers and not the fish. And it really is a great way. If you can simplify your fly selection, you simplify the sport so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. But, and there's always a but, right? Changing your fly patterns up sometimes, making a slight change to what everybody else is throwing, especially if you're on water that sees a ton of other anglers, can be a really effective way to catch either more fish or to catch bigger fish, because fish do start to recognize patterns over time, and they're going to wise up to those patterns pretty quick. Just an example of that, one of my favorite rivers, you will watch the fish start out beginning of every early blue wing season in April. But the blue wings start hatching, and the fish, they don't have very much inhibition. They're not too scared. They still want a very good drift, but as long as you put the fly in front of them, they'll usually eat it, and they're not awfully picky about it. But by the time the hatch has been going for a week, everybody's heard about it. There's hundreds of people there fishing it. They're catching nice fish on dry flies. Just a week into it, they've seen like 1 million blue wing patterns at that point. They get a little gun shy. They see it going over, and they're like, hey, Bob, yeah, see, that's that sparkle done from Sportsman's Warehouse. Yeah, don't eat that one. It got me last week. See this new piercing? Yeah, I know I look cool, but dadgum, it hurt. It really is like that. They just sit there and they really don't rise unless everything about your fly and your presentation is perfect. Now, that's an extreme example because that river gets so much pressure that, of course, it's going to happen that way. But you do see that play out on a lot of different rivers. And in the winter especially, I think, because we all default to very similar fly patterns, there's really not a whole lot on the menu either. We're throwing our eggs, our worms, our scuds, our sow bugs, and our midges. And yeah, there's a little bit of variation there. I mean, I can throw a green zebra midge. I can throw a red zebra midge. I could throw an orange egg, or I can throw a pink egg. But once the fish have seen like a few thousand worms, or They've seen your exact purple squirming worm bounce in front of them every Wednesday and Friday because those are the days you have to go hit the river. Excuse me. Doesn't it make sense that the fish would be a little bit more likely to eat something else, especially if that something else looks and moves like something else they're going to eat this time of year? It really kind of does. And I know this might feel a little antithetical to what we talk about on the show all the time, which is, put a fly in front of a fish and make it look real. You don't need to overcomplicate it. And presentation matters way more than pattern. And all of that's true. But using patterns that don't get used nearly as often, I'm not saying it's the middle of winter and go fish a chubby Chernobyl, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking keep it within the realm of what you should see, but change things up a little bit, add some variety to it. And that might be the key that unlocks some really great winter fly fishing for you. And just one more point before we get to the list of flies. The reason that the fish they'll go and they'll eat these other flies, that they're just a little bit different. This is why so many anglers love tying their own flies, because it allows us to literally put our own spin on the patterns that we love the most. And that really unique flavor helps those flies stand out, especially when we're fishing a really pressured river, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, where the fish see thousands of those patterns a day. It's really nice to be able to have one that doesn't look like the carbon copy of what everybody got at the fly shop. An example of that, I was just talking with my buddy Gene a couple of weeks ago, where we were comparing our sparkle duns, because he ties his differently than I do. He puts dubbing on his body. He doesn't use any antron for the tail or the wing case. And then I do thread bodies. I just very lightly dub the thorax, and I use a much sparser wing case, a little bit more antron for that trailing shuck. And neither of us is right. Neither of us is doing it the quote unquote right way, because both our flies work well. Okay? It's just another example of how just slightly tweaking it can get your flies to stand out, get the fish to pay attention to them. And then when they come over to inspect it, oh, this is the right size and shape for what I expect right now. They eat it. So having those opportunities, having that ability to slightly tweak things can really help you out. So that's why we love tying our flies. And that's why this list of flies that we're going to dive into right now can sometimes help you break out of a rut if you find yourself in one during the winter. And just real quick reminder, all of these flies, they're available in some 3-packs if you want to pick them up, try them out. We've got a few of them. So they're available for you if you want. Anyways, fly number 1 is the Duracell. And I like this in sizes 14 to 18. Duracell is a general attractor pattern, but basically it's like if you took a waltz worm, you changed it to purple, added a little bit of tail, and then a CDC collar. Okay, it looks an awful lot like tons of different nymphs, but it doesn't really look like any one thing in particular. You don't see it and think, oh yeah, that looks exactly like a mayfly nymph. Nah, it's got some good colors, it's got some good movement, helps it stand out to the fish, especially in the really slow moving water that they like to hang out in during winter. So there's your Duracell. Number 2 is the Copper John. I like these in sizes 14 to 16, and Copper John does not get the love it deserves. And part of that's because it's a pain in the butt to tie, because it's all wire and it just takes forever, and you got to use the UV resin to get it to look right. But it's awesome because it's super heavy, so it sinks like a rock. It just gets down to the strike zone and it stays there, and it does it really quick. And then it's got that really buggy mayfly, almost even a stonefly-esque style, little profile to it. It's super durable because it's all wire. So I don't think I've ever worn out a Copper John. I think I've lost all of them on rocks. I don't think I've ever worn one out. But it's just got enough color. It's got some contrast to it. It stands out really well in the water. It's a really great fly to use as the point fly in your rig to get everything down deep in the pools, or sometimes the fish will move into slightly quicker moving runs during the winter. So having the copper john as a fly that just rockets to the bottom and stays there is a really, really nice tool to have in the box. And again, it just, I don't see this fly getting the love it deserves for whatever reason. It's a good little pattern. Pattern number 3 is going to be the blowtorch. And I like this in sizes 14 to 16 as well. Basically, if you take the Duracell, you swap the tail out for something super flashy, you've got the blowtorch. So it's an even blingier version of the Duracell. It's like the East Coast version to the West Coast Duracell, I guess. It's just a great little nymph that's all about flash to get attention, but it's got some great shape and great movement, so it's going to attract the fish as it's drifting through the water. And fly number 4 is going to be our gunslinger. And I really like this a little bit smaller. I like it in sizes 16 to 18. And the gunslinger is another one of them underrated flies. It's real effective as a mayfly nymph. And you hear that and you're probably thinking, okay, what's this Durant guy doing? He's telling me to fish flies in the winter. He tells me to get this mayfly nymph. Mayflies don't hatch in the winter. Doesn't this feller know it? He's got a podcast, for crying out loud. Yeah, I understand. It sounds a little weird. Okay. Mayflies aren't hatching. You're right. But here's the thing. Mayfly nymphs still tend to be fairly active. I'll describe them that way in the winter. Even if they're not hatching, they're not rising up to the surface to become adults. 100% they're not doing that. But the nymphs still need to grow and get ready for that spring emergence. So they're going to be moving around a little bit. They're going to consistently be part of a fish's diet. They are much smaller. They are a much smaller part of the fish's diet in the winter, 100%. But they don't just disappear from the fish's diet completely. That's like telling me that wings are going to disappear from my diet completely, or Diet Coke. I mean, yeah, I go to my in-laws for Thanksgiving and they've got Diet Dr. Pepper, which is fine, and I'll drink it, but you don't think I'm going to run out? Go down to the gas station, get me a little 64-ouncer of Diet Coke just to wake up in the morning? Of course I'm doing that, right? I'm not going to just not do it because it's slightly inconvenient. That was maybe a tortured metaphor, but hopefully you get the point. The mayfly nymphs are still kicking around. And the gunslinger, it's a slim variation on the pheasant tail. So it's shaped just enough that it looks almost like a little bit of a midge nymph too, but it's got that mayfly profile to it. Sinks quick, and then again, I like it in those smaller sizes. So I know that might feel like it's a little off the wall, but I promise there's a method to why I put the gunslinger on this list. Our next fly is going to be the Spanish bullet. I like these in 14s and 16s. And one of these days, I used to see, this is a tangent, but bear with me, folks. I used to see all these flies for sale, or fly hooks for sale, I should say. I found some size 17 hooks and some 19s. I never found 15s or 21s, and I don't know why, but I found 15s and 17s, and someone told me that, oh, well, that's the size that they use in Europe, which I don't know if that's true. And I know we have a contingent of European listeners, so if you use 15s and 17s over there in Europe, please let me know. I would love to know if that's a thing. But I would just love a size 15 hook in general. Give me something right in the middle, okay? There's a bajillion hooks out there, and I can't go buy a 15. Come on. Let's make something happen here, or a 21. I want more options, because heaven knows there's not enough in the fly fishing and fly tying community, right? Oh, all right. I'm so sorry about that little tangent. I like the Spanish bullet in sizes 14s and 16s. It's a great little midge nymph. It can pass as other nymphs too. It'll do work as those, but it's slim, it sinks quickly, and that small hot spot and the tinsel flash really helps it stand out, adds some contrast to it as it's drifting through the water. And it's a great switch up from the Paragon as well. Those get used a ton. I think Alex and I were out fishing about a month ago now, and if I remember correctly, he had Spanish bullet on as a dropper and caught a couple fish on it pretty quick on a very pressured tailwater. So it's a good little bug. It'll work this time of year. Fly number 6 is going to be your guide's choice hairs here. I like these in 14s and 16s. You can even go down to 18s with the hairs here, but I use them the most in 16s. And this is another fly that I don't think gets quite the love it deserves. The hairs here really just doesn't have that appeal of all the other flies for whatever reason. But it's a really great effective pattern, and the guide's choice version especially works very well in winter because you add just a little bit more feathers to that wing case there. It gives it just a little bit more movement, gives it just a bit more noise in the water. And in the winter, I think that's critical. And I'm going to explain that in depth here in just a minute. But the guide's choice hairs here, it's a great fly that imitates your mayflies, your caddis. The larger ones can even look like little stonefly nymphs. So if you are fishing in a place that has a winter stonefly hatch, it could work very well for you in those instances. I think it's just a must-have in the winter for that reason. And our last fly, number 7, is the Rainbow Warrior. I like these down in a 16 and an 18. And the Rainbow Warrior, it's another one of those flies that kind of vaguely imitates a lot, but doesn't grab you as, oh, this is definitely a mayfly nymph. It looks a little bit like a midge, but it's got the right size and shape and a little bit of the right profile to work for a mayfly as well. And the fella who invented it, Lance Egan, he's even talked about how it seems to work really well in areas with a lot of scuds or sow bugs, including on lakes and whatnot. So it might even have some resemblance to those, to a fish's eyes as well. But in the winter, I think they work so well because they're bright. There is no mistaking when a Rainbow Warrior is drifting down through the current towards you if you're a fish, because that thing's got bling on it, like something with bling. I thought I had a good metaphor there, and I didn't have it. But anyways, there's so much contrast. The fish can easily see them. And then, again, they've got that great shape and profile to them, so they just look like a fishy meal. And despite the Rainbow Warrior being a pretty popular fly, I know a lot of folks use it and fish it. I see folks talking about it. But within my circle of anglers I fish with consistently, nobody I know uses it except for me. So it's one of those that I think gets talked about a lot, but maybe not tied on near as much as we would assume. So I think it qualifies for falling into this underrated category. And that's your list of those 7 underrated winter flies. But we're not done with this just yet, because I said I was going to dive into something in detail, and I'm going to. You probably noticed a common thread. See what I did there with these flies. I described a lot of these flies as flashy, or having a lot of movement and contrast, standing out in the water, getting fish's attention. All of those attributes are very important in the winter for a couple of reasons. First off, there's not a whole lot of bug activity going on. We know that the aquatic insects have died down. It's really just midges, scuds, sow bugs, worms, and then eggs that are really consistently going on. But since there's not very much bug activity going on, fish's metabolisms slow down. They're not eating as much in the winter either. They're not nearly as willing to move to eat a fly like they will in the summer. So that means your flies, if you want to get a fish to eat them, a lot of times they've really got to do some heavy lifting and getting the fish's attention. When you add hot spots, or you add some flash, or you add some CDC collars to get some good buggy movement, that'll accomplish that. It grabs the fish's attention as the fly's drifting through the water. Okay? So the second reason that it's important is the fish get pulled up in the slow, deep water this time of year. When flies sink that deep, their color really doesn't matter all that much, because what we know about fish and how they see flies, they don't see color as much as they see contrast. They are capable of seeing color, but contrast is what really makes things stand out and helps fish zero in on food items. So picking patterns with a lot of contrast, with a lot of bright contrasting colors, helps them stand out even more. It's going to grab that fish's attention. And then that's really going to help the fish see, oh, you know what? Yeah, that's something that looks like food. I'm going to go ahead and eat it. You've still got to get it right in front of their face. You got to make it look real. But adding just that flash, it's going to really help the fish see it better down deep. And finally, I did mention a bit about using mayfly nymphs or even stonefly nymphs during the winter. And I think this works reasonably well as one of the flies in your nymph rig, but I don't think I've ever tied on like a pheasant tail and a hare's ear in the winter, because even though your mayfly nymphs and some stonefly nymphs will move a little bit, especially as you get closer to spring and those bugs are ready to start hatching, the vast majority of a fish's diet in the winter is still going to be midges, scuds, sow bugs, and worms. So those flies always need to have a place in your rig. Those should be primary flies, but the other nymphs, like our midges, maybe even some caddis nymphs or some stonefly nymphs, you could tie those on as one fly in your rig, or any of the flies on this list. Tie them on as one fly in the rig. Don't go completely away from the staples. Again, it's just about changing a few little things, making a few tiny adjustments, and then seeing what will come of that. So hopefully y'all found something useful in that list. And if you've got any other flies that you would add to the list, definitely share them with us. Drop it in a comment. And final reminder, these patterns that we talked about, they are available in 3-packs over on our website. So I'll throw a link to those down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you are watching the video podcast. And now that we have wrapped up the list of flies, it is time to dive into the Q&A section of this week's show. Every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, definitely send those on in. I want to hear about it. I want to read these questions and help you. There's a link to do that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Aaron from Utah's got our first question, writes in and says, Spencer, after 3 years, I still feel like I live in the beginner neighborhood. I'm trying to find the code to the gate of the intermediate neighborhood, but I've had too many empty trips lately. I know that time spent on the water is crucial, but I have a busy job, kids, volunteer commitments, and days are getting shorter. Most days, the only place I can go is that highly pressured tailwater that you know so well, and it kicks my butt almost every time. I feel like I've picked the right flies, I'm getting a good drift, and putting them in the right spot, but after a good summer, I'm coming up empty too many times this fall, and every once in a while, a big brown will jump out of the water just to mock me. My question is, are those trips even worth it? Aaron, this is hands down one of the best questions that I have ever read on the show, so thank you a ton for sending it in. Short answer, yes, those trips are worth it. Long answer, I've literally been in your shoes, man. Solved the puzzle during one part of the year, and then we moved to a new season, and it feels like you're starting from scratch all over again. It is so frustrating because you got hope, you got optimism, you're feeling like, yeah, I can do this, and then, yeah, no. It all comes crashing back. You feel like a failure. It's frustrating. It is so frustrating. But I wouldn't trade those tough days, those short sessions of getting skunked. I wouldn't trade that for anything. I mean, shoot, when I was going to school, when I was going to college, I scheduled all my classes so that I would have the afternoon mayfly hatches free in the spring. But there were some days when, you know how college is, sometimes you just get wrapped up in junk that doesn't matter. And there'd be some days where I'd only have like an hour or two of the hatch to fish before it was just too dark or too windy or whatever. And felt the same way. I'd go there, I'd be excited, and the river was only 20, 25 minutes from campus. But I would show up all sorts of excited, all sorts of ready to catch fish, and then just watch them rise all around me, rise all around my fly, and just ignore me the whole time. It's very frustrating. But I would not trade those days for anything because they legitimately taught me a ton. And in the moment, it was really hard to see what they were teaching me. So I'm going to give you some advice and a challenge that I wish someone had given to me all those years ago. And the advice is this: keep going to the water. Keep tweaking your setup. Keep changing things about your presentation to make it as perfect as possible. But above all, don't fall into the rut of, all right, I'm parking at this pullout. I'm going to use this rig. I'm fishing these holes. A lot of beginners, myself included, we want this go there, use this prescription for fly fishing where it's almost plug and play for just showing up and catching fish. Now, you listen to the show, so you know that that's not true, but it's so easy to fall into that. I find myself still falling into that way too often, where I've got a couple of hours before I've got work to do. So I run out to the river. I think, I'm going to fish this section. And I just rig up with the stuff. I fish the same holes. I fish it the same way. And you fall into that rut of not actually reacting and reading the water and fishing, letting the river dictate how you fish instead of trying to make the river bend to your will. Okay. So don't fall into that rut, because that was my biggest issue in those days when I only had a couple hours and I'd get skunked, because I would think, I'm going to go somewhere where I know I can catch fish, where I've caught a fish before. And that's not a bad idea. But when you haven't caught a fish out of there in 10, 15 tries, it's time to start doing something different. Okay. Don't fall into that rut. So that's the advice. The challenge: I want you to sit down. I want you to make a list. Get up pen and paper, old school, just like in the Stone Age. Back when I taught high school, when I used to make my students handwrite stuff, man, they acted like I just asked them to read War and Peace in one class period. Oh my goodness. So hopefully you don't find this as torturous as they did. But I want you to write down what rigs you use during fall, where you fish them, and why you think those rigs worked. Then I want you to make a list of what you know for sure about winter fly fishing. Okay. It's colder. There's not as many bugs. So the fish are congregating in slower water, and they're going to be most active during the warmest part of the day. Then what I want you to do, see if there's any obvious overlap between what you were fishing in the fall and where you were fishing in the fall and what we know about winter. Okay. Honestly, the biggest overlap is probably going to be with you using eggs or midges if you fish those a lot in the fall. But the reason that I want you to do this is I want you to look at what you did in the fall and see how much of what you were doing then is still how you're fishing. Are you still fishing riffles and runs? Are you still using small mayfly and caddis nymphs? Are you still fishing in a way that's not applicable to the current season that we're in? Because those fall tactics just aren't going to be the ticket right now, since we finally got snow, we've got cold, we've finally got ice kicking around. You have to move on from what you were doing in the fall and move into what we know works during the winter. So that means focusing on the deeper pools and runs, the flies that are going to be the most active. You can switch your fly selection up with some of those patterns that we mentioned today. But that doing this little bit of an exercise will probably help things click for you. And hopefully it makes sense. Hopefully, again, it's not tortuous to get out a piece of paper and a pencil and make an actual old school style list. And then the last thing that could probably help you out is we do have our entire winter masterclass that's out now, and it goes into tons of detail on winter fly fishing. So I'll link that in the show notes or right here on the screen. If you're watching the video podcast, you can go check that out. Hopefully that'll help you out as well. But again, thank you so much for the question, Aaron. I really appreciate it. Wade from Canada has our next question, writes in and says, "Hey, Spencer, I'd like to start off by saying that you guys at VFC have really helped me, and I'm sure many other anglers, on my fly fishing journey. I would like to thank you guys for the work you put in to help the community. On to the question. I'm considering buying the SA Mastery Infinity as my next fly line on the 8.5-foot 4-weight. I understand that it has a longer head, about 50 feet. I'm wondering what are the pros and cons of having a longer head versus a short one on a fly line. I've heard a longer head is much harder to cast, so I'm wondering if it's the right choice for me or should I go with a short head? P.S. Canned Diet Coke is on top. The bottled stuff isn't nearly as good. Fountain Diet Coke is super hit or miss. Wade? Yeah, you're 100% right about that. The Diet Coke situation, there's a reason that's always a can on the desk here in the podcast studio and not a bottle or a fountain drink, because McDonald's is the only place where I feel like the fountain drinks, Diet Coke in particular, but all of them, aren't hit or miss. McDonald's has it figured out. Everywhere else, you never know. Most gas stations, it's a coin flip. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be too watery? These are the problems that we need to figure out as a society. It's almost 2026. But we shouldn't be guessing at the quality of our fountain drinks. Hey, you run on that platform, you got my vote, dadgummit. Anyways. So let's get into your question here. And for those who don't know, fly lines, they are built with tapers. So they are going to be thicker at the end where we attach our leaders, and then a lot thinner at the end where we attach them to the reel. The thickest, heaviest part of the line towards the end where we attach our leaders, that's called the head of the fly line. And the head is the section of line that gives a line its designated weight. That's where almost all of the weight of the fly line is located. So if it falls within the 5-weight window, it's a 5-weight line. If it falls within the 6-weight window of weight, it is a 6-weight line, and that is based on the weight of that fly line's head. Now, traditionally, heads on fly lines were about 30 feet long, and they'd have different tapers depending on what you'd want them to do. It's not just thin, 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 and then thick, thick, thick. They'll taper it a little bit differently depending on if you're throwing bass bugs and big streamers, for example. Those lines would have a very short, very heavy taper, maybe all of the weight within 20 feet instead of 30. That's going to help load heavy flies, load fast action rods, make casting flies like that a lot smoother of an experience. But you wouldn't want that same taper design for dry flies, because you would want a taper that's a lot more gradual, a lot more delicate, that spreads the weight out as evenly as possible, because then that's going to help the fly line land and the fly land as softly on the water as possible. So that's what heads and tapers do in a nutshell. Now, in my experience, I have not noticed a huge difference at all in how a fly line casts based on its head length in terms of whether it's easier or harder to cast. I've got some fly lines that I've got one line that's got like almost a 60-foot head on it. It's a super fancy dry fly something or other line. And then I've got those lines, the depth charge lines, I think they're called. They're for bomb and streamers from the drift boat, made to just pick up and toss in one cast. And it's got a super short, really aggressive head. And I don't notice a difference in how those things cast, if one's easier or one's harder. I think that once you understand how to cast a fly rod, you can pretty quickly get the hang of any rod and line pairing. So I really wouldn't worry about the head length impacting your ability to cast a fly rod. I just wouldn't worry about that. What I would consider, though, is the head length and taper affecting what you want to do with that rod. Now, you mentioned you're putting this on an 8.5-foot 4-weight, and those are almost always used exclusively for dry flies, maybe some dry dropper work, but that's what your 8.5-foot 4-weight excels at, is some dry fly work, maybe light nymphing if you really need it to. So if that's the case, I was picking this out for myself, I would want to head with a gradual long taper to it, because that's going to give me the best performance for dry flies and then also for that lighter nymphing that I get into. And those longer heads, they're also going to be a ton easier to mend when you've got a lot of line out, because you're lifting and moving line that's got some actual mass to it. It's not just the really thin, level running line that makes up the back half of most fly lines. So it's something else to consider. But that's where all my focus would be. And when I'm buying new fly lines, in fact, I just ordered a couple of new ones for some testing, just to play around with, see what they're doing. And that's what I always take into consideration is what rods is going on, what do I use this rod the most for, what taper is going to benefit me than most. So you want to try and match the fly line's taper to what you're trying to do. Now, I've personally found the infinity taper from Scientific Anglers to be a really great all-around fly line because it's a long taper. It's not super aggressive. It's about a quarter size heavy. So I think it'd be great on a 4-weight. Although I do tend to default to true to weight lines on my 4-weights because I think they give you a better presentation with dry flies because they're not too heavy. But that infinity taper is not going to be a bad option on a 4-weight for you either. So hopefully that helps. Thanks for sending the question in. Paul from Germany has our next question, writes in and says, "Great show. I listened to every episode. I recently got into fly tying and started with some of the classic patterns like the parachute Adams and the elk hair caddis. As a beginner, not every fly ends up looking the way it should. Sometimes the tail is too long, the thorax is too bulky or not bulky enough, or I accidentally trap hackle or use the wrong amount of hair. I still end up with something fishable, but not always quite right. The feedback from the school community has already helped a lot. Thank you for that. My question is, should I keep these imperfect flies in my box? Do they still catch fish as well as a properly tied version? And from your experience, what mistakes make a fly truly unusable?" Paul, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I assume that's how it's pronounced. I took 3 years of German in high school, so I know just enough to make me dangerous. But thanks a bunch for writing in and for listening to the show. Love hearing from our European listeners. And just a little side note, Paul from Germany's grammar and punctuation, everything in his question, like top 1% of all questions I get. So, and I'm going to assume that English isn't your first language either. So I'm really impressed by that too. It was, as the former English teacher of me, just got to tip my cap to you. I appreciate it. But anyways, if your biggest problems with your flies are tails that aren't quite right or some hackle fibers getting trapped near the eye, and that's all that's making your flies like not all that great, you are miles and you're marathons ahead of where I was as a beginning tyer. And honestly, most of us here at VSC too, I'd reckon. I mean, Alex and Berkeley are very good tyers. I would venture to say Berkeley's probably a better tyer than I am at this point. It took me a long time to get to where I felt like I could dub a properly tapered body on my dry flies. And even now, especially on size 18 parachute flies, I still don't feel like I get the body dubbed and tapered as well as I could. So short answer, keep those flies in your box and fish them. Long answer, you'd be really surprised at just how well these not great flies can work sometimes, especially the mayfly imitations. You mentioned tying the Adams, so I'll pick on the mayflies. The flies that don't look quite right are often really great to use during big hatches when there's crippled adults on the surface. So bugs that, they didn't quite hatch right, maybe they've got a little bit of a mashed wing or they've got a broken leg or something similar going on. Those deformities can make them an ideal target for trout because those crippled flies are much less likely to escape when a fish goes to eat them off of the surface. And some of my best fish have come on cripples when it looks like there's a million adults on the surface. So I'd keep them in there just for that. But my guess is your not great flies are probably still way better than my good flies. So just by how you describe your flies. And the last thing on this point is you're going to find that fish are a lot less discerning about our flies than we are. The buggier and the messier a fly looks sometimes, the better it can work in some rivers, some instances. Unless it's just awful. Your proportions are completely off. It looks like it was tied by a blind squirrel or me on day 3 of no wings, right? It's going to end up working for a fish eventually. So I'd keep them in the box, keep tying, keep fishing them, and really not worry about it too much. The only time when, and this is when I personally don't use a fly either, is if I get the proportions or I get the size or I get some of the shape just so wrong, there's no saving it, and I just pull it out of the vise and start over. So hopefully that helps. Thanks for sending the question in. And thanks to everyone who sent questions in for this week's show. that wraps up the Q&A section, but we've got the Live Real Life moment coming right up. Every week here at Untangled, we end the show by sharing a story and picture from folks out there in the VFC audience who are living real life. This is what VFC is here for, to help y'all have fun and enjoy your time out on the water. So if you've got a Live Real Life moment you would like to share, you can go ahead and send those on in. There's a link to do that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's Live Real Life moment comes to us from Joe, who writes in and says, "Hello, Spencer. Big fan of VFC and everything you guys do. I wanted to share the story of my first season fly fishing. I grew up spin fishing for trout in my local Wisconsin streams, but switched over to river fishing for whatever I could catch when I had kids and inevitably grew out of my waders. 20 years later, I discovered my local fly shop and decided to take a fly fishing class in January. When our trout season opened up in May, I started going out about twice a week for a few hours. I probably fished a dozen times without catching a single fish. Every time I went, my dad would call and say, 'Well, did you catch anything?' And I'd say, 'Nah, but I still had fun.' After a while like that, he said, 'Well, you're lucky you are the way you are. Most people would have gone back to spinning rod by now.' Eventually, I caught my first trout on the fly rod, and then 3, and then 5. Fast forward to October 15th, the last day of the season. I fished all day, all of my best spots on 3 different streams, but 25 fish in the net, browns and brookies. Wow, what a feeling. I wanted to share this story for frustrated new fly anglers. I know they're out there. Never give up. Thanks for all you guys do at VFC. It's been a great resource for me. Diet Coke and chicken wings rule." Joe, that's awesome. And that is like the perfect cap to what we were talking about with Aaron's question earlier on in the show, too. So thank you for sharing that, sending that on in, and you're 100% right, man. Just keep at it, and it's all going to come together eventually. Appreciate it a ton. And appreciate all of you who stay and listen to all of the show every single week. That means more to us than you know. And if you want to help us out even more, make sure you rate and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to it. The more ratings and subscriptions that we get means we can help more people live real life, which is the entire reason the VFC exists. So I'm going to be done talking. You're going to go have some fun this next week. Get out on the water, enjoy yourselves. Maybe put a few fish in. Don't get any frostbite either. And until next week, live real life.